I am very pleased to be in Madras Christian College to deliver this address today. MCC is an old and established educational institution. It has moved successfully with the times over its long and illustrious history. This is why it has retained its standing. Today, there are new opportunities and the college will need to orient its programs in the scenario of a rapidly changing and aspirational India. In this brief talk, I would like to tell you about why we need to rethink our strategies for education and research in India, because MCC is an educational institution. COVID, in a way, should be the catalyst for a change in our thinking, because it has highlighted some of the problems we have been facing and trying to pretend didn't exist. I will start with higher education and then say a few things about education policies in general. COVID, whatever havoc it has caused all over the world, and there is no doubt that it is a catastrophe of a type not witnessed in our lifetimes, is also a perfect storm for deep reform in education and research. It provides the trigger for a completely new relook into these critical sectors. The time for piecemeal solutions that are based on consensual agreements and political calculations has long since passed. Any attempt to cling to these old, safe, more comfortable ways of doing things will get us into serious trouble, and that too quite quickly. We must reform because there is now no alternative. We have state universities which handle the largest number of students but have almost no funding and no research. Then we have central universities which have a little more funding and a bit more research. In the end, there must be a certain amount of research in any postgraduate institution. Separating teaching and research has been a foolish policy that has brought no gains to the country. For science subjects, we have the IITs which cater to two entirely different streams of students, the B.Tech and the MSc PhD. And then the spin-offs from the IITs, namely the ICERs, that are still too new to pass a judgment on. CSIR is neither here nor there. It hands out PhD degrees too, although it is not an educational institution. In humanities and social sciences, the burden is placed on the poorly funded state universities. I am sorry to say so. The course programs are also highly politicized, but more so in the central government institutions, following from the cynical agreement between the government of Indira Gandhi and the leftist dispensation in the 1970s. So we are talking about things that happened 50 years ago. These socialistic economic models have lost currency everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, everywhere in the world, except in Indian academia where they thrive. Some of these social sciences departments just churn out Andolanjeevis, some of whom migrate abroad after a few years of professional agitations during their student days and live respectable, law-abiding lives in faraway foreign countries. Others think they will become successful politicians. Of course they don't, and gradually they become troublesome bores who inflict their opinions on others in social media. What a waste of taxpayer money educating these people. After COVID, we know that education cannot be treated independently from 1, the economy, 2, geopolitics, and 3, the constitution. I will take up these factors one by one. Let us take the state of our economy first. There are huge money cuts now post-COVID. The budget of the entire education ministry is just around 100,000 crores. It should be 6 times this amount, realistically. Considering that the salary and pension budget is almost 55% and upwards of the whole kitty in government educational institutions, this leaves very little to do any kind of research. In this situation, the entry of the private sector in the educational system becomes a must. The private sector has already entered the field of higher education actually. But how much control should the government exercise over private institutions? Some of them, of course, are little more than money spinning businesses, the newer ones, not MCC. What about foreign universities? Should they be allowed to open campuses in India? Should our institutions hire foreign faculty? How do you fit them into our scheme of reservations in employment? Suppose a private university or a foreign university wants to have courses only in certain subjects. This is a more tricky problem. Suppose they say we want to start a program in pharmaceutical sciences but not in African studies. Do we allow them? Suppose they say we do not want to follow your reservation policies. Do we allow them? Suppose they say we want to admit foreign students in large numbers because they can be asked to pay higher fees. This is standard. In many foreign universities, students of the particular country where it is located pay very cheap fees, and students from all other countries pay much higher fees. So there is nothing unusual about what I am suggesting. But do we prohibit them from entering because they are asking these questions? By prohibiting them, we are effectively saying that foreign students cannot study in Indian colleges and universities. This may be bad for our international image and soft power. If an Indian government institution runs a foreign campus, as is being talked about today quite seriously for some of the IITs, will it have our reservations there? If MCC wants to start a campus in Singapore, which is quite a reasonable thing to do considering that Chennai and Singapore are so close by, because it feels it will be economically profitable for MCC to do so, would it be willing to do so without reserving places for Christians? What is the long-term future of minority educational institutions in India? Another question. Will they be allowed to keep the many privileges they have in the name of secularism, an idea that nobody really understands anymore, assuming we understood it at all in the past 75 years? We didn't know what it was then, we don't know what it is now. Suppose the government runs out of money, which is already happening, and there is no alternative but to accept money from private and foreign institutions that lay down certain conditions. What will we do? Taking to the streets, stone pelting, shouting and rioting, as we are now doing for hijabs and namaz, is not an option, because for too long we have lived as if there was no tomorrow. Tomorrow has come. Today is tomorrow. I realize that I am asking many uncomfortable questions. I am not ashamed of doing so. It is easy to talk about nice, comfortable things. But comfortable things don't give you answers to uncomfortable problems, like not getting jobs. That is the point. That is the crux of the matter. Education has to empower a student to get a job commensurate with his or her level of training. That is not happening in India today, and hence you see the anger and uncertainty in the student community. Now let us go to the second point in education research, which I believe is worthy of consideration: geopolitics. Geostrategies are going to be very important because countries now, post-COVID especially, are going to become more isolationist. They are going to withdraw into themselves. Since Ukraine is in the news now, I will quote a Ukrainian proverb that says that a thread from many looms makes a shirt for a naked man. What does this mean? It means the long and short of this is that we must solve our own problems ourselves. We cannot use borrowed models. Actually, withdrawing into oneself is not so bad in times of crisis. For geostrategy, let us take an example from the pharma sector. Till 1990, we were doing quite well in making pharmaceutical compounds in India because of the liberal policies that the various governments adopted between 1970 and 1990, and we developed good expertise in making these compounds. We were doing our things by ourselves for ourselves. The thread was spun from a single loom. By 1990, however, cheaper Chinese imports started flooding the market. The cost differential for common pharmaceuticals sold across the counter is roughly 10 to 30% between these Chinese imports and local products. If the government had encouraged the pharma industry and made up that balance, we would not have been in a soup today. This dependence on imports caused us to lose our scientific edge in making these drugs. So we were able to make the drugs before. Now because the Chinese imports became cheaper, industry stopped making, so the number of people who are trained to do good synthetic chemistry, that started dropping. Simple, supply and demand. We lost the technical competence in synthesis we had. Industries took to formulations rather than synthesis. Formulation means taking the pure drug and make it into tablets, capsules, syrups, injections, ointments. We are world leaders in formulation, but it is dangerous to depend too much on formulations. Generally, the share of formulations in a healthy pharma industry is 25%. For us, it is 75%. Why is it dangerous? Formulation depends on getting the pure drug from somewhere else, either through domestic synthesis or Chinese imports. Domestic synthesis we are not doing, so we have to depend on the Chinese imports. What happens if China denies us those imports? Our pharma industry, which is over dependent on formulations, will collapse overnight. Yes, it may hurt the Chinese temporarily to deny us their exports, but tomorrow they may decide that they will cover that sum through subsidies to their industry to offset their loss, but more to cause more suffering to India. Where do we go then? We have 70 million type 2 diabetics and probably 150 million hypertensives in this country. Where will all these people go without the standard daily medications that they are taking? Chinese drug exports to India, this is another interesting factor. Chinese drug exports to India are around 10% of their total exports. They are exporting everywhere. Our Chinese imports account for 90% of our total imports. We are importing only from them. In short, we need them. They do not need us. They are a powerful country. We are not. I come back to Ukraine. Before you talk too much about democracy and protecting this and protecting that and freedom of this and freedom of that, 4 top countries in the world, China and America are 1 and 2, or you can call them 2 and 1. Russia and India are 3 and 4, or you can call them 4 and 3. But there is no doubt that 1, 2, 3, 4 are these 4 countries: India, China, Russia and USA. Now what is happening in Ukraine? Number 1 country, USA, is making Ukraine irritate number 4 country to weaken number 4. What happens if number 2 tries to irritate number 3 like that by asking Pakistan to go on pushing us, which it is already doing? Ukraine is Russia's Pakistan. Think about it like that. Then you will be able to understand why we have, what is geostrategy, why even our science topics have to be tailored, the courses made, so that things that are strategically and vitally important for India in times of great crisis are the ones that are taught to young students, because this is where the most jobs will be 5 years, 10 years from now. We will have only these 4 top countries in the world. So we have to really figure out what we are doing before we start listening to this and that and social media and meaningless things on Twitter and Facebook and all that. All that is meaningless. Please remember that we are living in a very dangerous world today, and you young students are the ones who are inheriting this world. So it is something that you have to think about seriously as you are leaving college and going into the large world outside. For the final point linked to educational policy changes, I want to go to the constitutional aspects. I will touch on 3 areas where constitutional intervention is becoming important. The first is whether education should belong to the central list or to the state list or to the concurrent list where it is today. These are serious questions because there are plus and minus points of having education in each of these 3 categories. All are good and all are bad. Let us not forget, in 1975, at the controversial time of the emergency, education was pushed into the concurrent list from the state list, where it had remained peacefully since 1950. Should it then go back now to the state list? That is what some state governments, including Tamil Nadu, are arguing. Should it go to the central list for some time at least, until situation stabilizes? Or should it remain where it is in the concurrent list? Now, I ask, these are tough questions and I am asking you to ponder over them. Concurrent list should not be an option simply because there is a disagreement between the center and the state. You see, because our constitution is so written that if it comes to a battle between the center and the center always wins. So, the concurrent list is not a solution to this problem. For example, today there is a lot of discussion in Tamil Nadu on NEET, the medical college exam. This is connected with this concurrent list problem. Why are other states not agitating about NEET? Have you all ever thought about it? Is it that the state government here is effectively admitting that its own colleges have not delivered the goods? How long will the state government maintain that social backwardness is the only reason Tamil Nadu students might not be doing well in NEET? Has social backwardness been removed in those other states that are following NEET? I am curious to know this. So, is this an educational question, a social question, or just rank political opportunism? Get votes. Say whatever you like to please the public at that time, get the votes and then forget. Students must ask these questions to those in power. Students have, throughout the world history, have caused sometimes fundamental changes in the state of governance of their countries, Some of these important things are what you should be questioning, young men and women. Not agitating about the right to practice your religion in the classroom. That is the least important. When you have no money and no geopolitical influence, you cannot indulge yourself in fancies and fantasies. India may be number 3 or number 4. Unless it becomes number 1 or number 2, I am not happy. Even number 3 and number 4 is not good enough in today's world. It is so competitive. If you do not have money, you cannot indulge yourself, for example, in these reservations. The idea underlying reservations is undoubtedly noble, but how can we implement them within an economically sound model, and how long should reservations continue? Ambedkar himself said that a reservation is no longer a reservation if it applies to 70% of the population. He said this during the Constitutional Assembly debates 1946 to 1949. Reservations cannot go on forever because this would mean that they were not successful. There must be a balance between equity and equality. Basically, the quality of teaching and research must be such that the need for reservations become less and less as we go along. Throughout the country, however, reservations have become linked to political vote banks. Many political parties maintain their vote banks by keeping people uneducated. In any case, no government can afford reservations in education and employment indefinitely, because government does not have the kind of money to deliver education to all the people it is giving seats. Another problem we have is that we are overproducing people with degrees in subjects that are not going to give them jobs. Maybe it's better to study pharmaceutical sciences than African studies. If you study pharma, you may get a job. If you study African studies today in India, you may not get a job. So if somebody comes and says, I want to start a university only for pharma, maybe you will be wise if you accept that proposal. The situation in humanities and social sciences is very bad, I will confess. In North India, the percentage of unemployable graduates is extremely high. In the South, it is slightly better, but still not any cause for satisfaction, not for me at any rate. The issue of medium of instruction in primary and higher education continues to seize the imagination of students, teachers, parents and educationists. It is a matter fraught with political connotations, especially in Tamil Nadu. The National Education Policy NEP 2020 identifies issues and analyzes various schemes that have been operating so far. Rather vaguely, it says that the three-language formula will continue to be implemented while keeping in mind the constitutional provisions, aspirations of the people, regions and the union, and the need to promote multilingualism as well as to promote national unity. A lawyer must have written this. What does it mean? To me, it sounds like nonsense, meaningless. Is it some kind of backdoor imposition of Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states? This is an obvious question that any South Indian will ask. India does not have a national language, and rightly so. We don't have a national language. Remember this. Let nobody tell you that we have a national language. It was decided in the Constituent Assembly that we would not have a national language. Never make that mistake. A polyglot country like ours does not need one. Our Constitution recognizes 22 official languages. 22 official languages. And some combination of these is used by the union and state governments in their work. That's all. As India strives to attend in the Committee of Nations, it is clear that our huge numbers of children and young adults of school and college going age should be optimally advantaged in order that they are able to cope and compete within their state, within the country and internationally, within the whole world. This leveraging is most effectively done linguistically. A child should be taught, must be taught, basic concepts in the language in which he or she can best emote and give free rein to imagination. English is our pathway to the world. It is also a sort of linked language within the country, although Hindi is fast replacing it in this regard. The need for a linked language is, however, not as acute as it was, say, in 1950, when linguistic groups were sharply demarcated. TV, movies and social media, also the migration of people across the country have ensured that many residents in urban and semi-urban areas have some sort of working knowledge of English and Hindi. People from outside a state also seem to be readily picking up the local language, even when it is quite distinct from their mother tongue. One hears a lot more Hindi in Chennai today than one did 10 years ago. At the same time, I hear North Indians in Chennai speaking Tamil in, say, shops and restaurants. Languages are no longer impenetrable silos that divide people. Languages unite. Languages do not divide. I can speak 4 Indian languages comfortably. So, I'm not unique. Many people are multilingual in India like me. I'm not counting English. There is little doubt that the imaginative skill of an individual is enhanced if basic education is imparted in the mother tongue. The NEP discreetly speaks of, quote, home language, mother tongue, local language, regional language, unquote. Home language, mother tongue, local language, regional language. Let us not forget that for the vast majority of us, all these languages are one and the same. It is important that our young people are equipped to excel in imaginative skills, because it is such skills that are sorely lacking in our outmoded rote learning method of education today. Accordingly, there can be no doubt that education in the foundational stage, as defined in NEP, namely ages 3 to 8, must be in the local language with no exception. By no exception, I really mean no exception. No different rules for private schools, no different rules for convent schools, no different rules for government schools. No, everybody. Don't speak to me about children of transferable central government employees. They are a minuscule minority for which a special solution can be worked out. The minority should not dictate to the majority who belong to the state. This is our unique speciality in India. When the smaller the minority, the more it can dictate to the larger the majority. Same thing is happening here also. Minority in this language matter should not dictate to the majority who belong to the state. They were born in the state. They will live in this state for most of their lives. Ideally, education in the local language should also continue into the preparatory 8 to 11 years old, 8 to 11th class, 8 to 11 years old, middle 11 to 14 years old, secondary 14 to 18 years old. Now, even more ideally, higher education should also be conducted in the local language as an alternative to English. Both choices should be allowed. Way back in 1937, Rabindranath Tagore, he urged Dr. Shamaprasad Mukherjee, the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, to permit students to write their PhD thesis in Bengali. And he said he was going to give the convocation address that year to Calcutta University in Bengali, and he did so. So I see nothing wrong in that. I see nothing wrong in a PhD thesis from MCC being written in Tamil. Absolutely nothing, because this is the way in which the imaginative skill will be triggered off. English is still essential, however. An increased felicity in this wonderful international language needs to be developed in order that we can compete aggressively in the metropolitan and international arenas. It can and should come in as a second language everywhere at the preparatory stage, age 8, while a third language, say Hindi, Sanskrit, Urdu, could enter at the middle stage, age 11, without the need for passing an exam. So you pass exam only in the local language and in English, enough. The entire issue of language should be moved from the emotional to the pragmatic. There is no need to invoke either patriotism or regional pride. There is no need to say Tamil means I am in regional pride, Hindi means I am nationalistic, English means I am international, I am global citizen. Nothing like that. Okay? I speak all these three languages quite comfortably. And there is no contradiction. No, I am still who I am. There is no need to label me like this and that. There is no need to invoke. Language is a matter of utility, communicability, and practicality. Our educational policy should be framed accordingly. In short, our so-called 3-language formula, 2-language formula, and other formulae may be generally allowed to lapse. They were useful in the interim, no doubt, but they will hardly be so useful in the long run. A few words about science and technology are in order before I conclude. Science is strategic. The Western countries have shown us that good science leads to more money, which in turn leads to better science. In this Ukraine war yesterday, Russia used a paint for those missiles which cannot be detected in the radar systems. So that's why they just come very stealth missiles or something they call them. So you do better science, you will have better strategic advantage. Battle of Plassey, 1757. We lost 60,000 people, the English lost only 600. Why? Because they had guns that were able to aim more accurately than our guns. That's all. After that, 200 years of slavery, because our science was not so good. The Western countries have shown that good science leads to more money, which in turn leads to better science. The more money you have, the better the science you can do. It is only because of S&T that the West has dominated the rest of the world for so long. China has realized this long before us. So now it is overtaking the US in science, which is why the US is getting so scared. And the only way to facilitate S&T is to improve the education system. Education is all important, but you must remember it is a slow investment. It is not like building roads and bridges. What you sow, you only reap after 50 years. If you sow weeds and thorny plants, the thorny plants will become huge thorny forests and weeds after 50 years. Education has been neglected or distorted in a profound way in our country. The present time is, I believe, where we as a people must work together to put it in a proper and higher setting so that India may find its true place in a changing world. The future belongs to you, graduating youngsters of MCC, and thousands of others like you. Our generation has been unable to provide answers. It is up to you to pose the right questions. Jai Hind, thank you very much, and all the very best for a bright future.